Hello everyone and welcome to the Hunt Nebraska Spring Turkey video series. My name is Hunter Nikolai. I'm the Hunting and Shooting Sports R3 coordinator here in Nebraska with the National Wild Turkey Federation in cooperation with the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission. Today we're going to talk about mapping tools and hunt planning for your spring turkey hunt. This is one video of a 5-part series over the next month where we'll talk everything turkey hunting, from mapping tools and hunt planning today to shotgun patterning, decoys and calls, how to clean a wild turkey, and also a live question and answer session with Nebraska Game and Park staff and a conservation officer on April 6th. Before we get started here, this is a pre-recorded video. If you have any questions throughout the video or if you're watching after the fact, please type those questions in the comments and I or another Nebraska Game and Park staff member will get back to you. As we're approaching the opening of the Nebraska spring turkey hunting seasons here, with the archery season kicking off on March 25th and the firearm shotgun season kicking off on April 16th, I want to provide some resources and tools that you can use as a hunter, whether you're new or experienced, on how you can plan and scout for turkeys without even leaving your house prior to that next step of getting to the field and scouting in the field. As I go through this today, feel free to follow along on your phone or your desktop in a web browser. If you don't already use Onyx Hunt, the application on your phone, I'd urge you to download that now. So when I get to that part, if you want to follow along, you can do so. But before we get to Onyx, I want to cover some resources that the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission offers through their own webpage. So if you're following along, go to outdoornebraska.gov. Outdoornebraska.gov is the Nebraska Game and Parks official webpage, and here there's an abundance of resources on everything the Game and Parks does, but today we're going to go to the Places to Go tab and click on that. And scroll down a little bit, you'll see a picture here with 2 hunters and a where to hunt, and we're going to want to click on that. So Nebraska offers what is called the Public Access Atlas, which displays in a GIS map all of the public hunting access opportunities available to you, and really is pretty comprehensive and helps you find places to go. And we're gonna dive into that here shortly. But before we do that, I just want to cover some of the different types of properties that either the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission has, or through partner organizations or the federal government, lands that are open for hunting. So the first one is open fields and waters lands. These are private lands that Nebraska Game and Parks Commission works with private landowners to offer public access to. There are some restrictions on certain properties, so we'll talk about that in a little bit. But getting into the state lands, the main one here is the wildlife management areas, which are generally open to hunting, trapping, fishing in the season, unless they're otherwise posted here, as it says. State recreation areas, some of those lands are open to hunting and trapping as well. And then state parks and state historical parks have a little more restrictions, but we'll talk about that as well. And then just some of the federal lands, so U.S. Forest Service lands, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers lands, waterfowl production areas, national wildlife refuges, and see there's a lot here, that all of these properties that are outlined here are in the Public Access Atlas and outline whether you can hunt there or not. So we'll get into that in a minute, but I just wanted, if you ever have questions or want more information on certain types of properties that are listed in the Access Atlas, or if you don't know you can hunt them or not, come to this page and you can read up a little bit more on how those properties are acquired, how they're open to hunting or not. And then if you scroll all the way to the bottom on this page, there's a piece on private lands here. We'll talk a little bit about scouting private lands. A lot of what I'm talking about today will apply to private lands. But for the most part, for what we're looking at today, we're going to be looking at public access properties. And just remember that if you're going to hunt private land in Nebraska, you do need landowner permission prior to hunting, whether that land is posted or not. And scroll all the way to the bottom. I want to talk a little bit about trip planners and planning your hunt even before you start to identify some properties that you might want to hunt or explore it in scouting. So if you scroll all the way to the bottom here, there's a Learn More tab under trip planners, and these are kind of unique. The Nebraska Game and Parks Commission puts together these trip planners that kind of outline everything you need to know if you want to hunt certain areas of the state. So they have for spring turkey, there are currently 3 trip planners, one in the Pine Ridge, one in the southwest part of Nebraska, and then the north central part of Nebraska. So these are available on that page. I'm going to open one up just to show you what they entail and how you might be able to use them if you're planning a turkey hunt this spring or in the future. So these trip planners are specific to the area that they outline. They outline your season dates here for the 2022 season, for spring, your permit prices, how to buy a permit, all that information you need to know. And then some of those lands you might want to hone in on when you're looking at the public access atlas in that area. So it's kind of all right there, gives you a place to start versus having to start from scratch. And if you scroll on to the next page, there's some other activities that you can locate to do while you're hunting, where to stay. A lot of Nebraska Game and Parks properties, the state parks, things like that are great to stay at. And then kind of gives you an outline here. So again, some of those WMAs, state parks, other areas that you might want to consider hunting. So give those a look if you're new or an experienced hunter. I think those are great for helping you start to either plan a trip, or if you live in those areas, can give you a great start even before you get out scouting to locate some good areas to find turkeys. But I'm going to go back to the page we were just on here. Remember, I just went to that where to hunt on the Nebraska Game and Parks website. And if you scroll all the way back up to the top, you'll see find a place to hunt, view the atlas. And this is really what we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about today. So I'm going to click on that, and it's going to load up a GIS map that will display all of those properties however I want the system to do it. So before you move forward, you're going to have to take a look at this disclaimer. Game and Parks is pretty good at updating this, very good at updating this in real time, but just always know to read signs when you get to properties and double check a property to make sure you can hunt on it before you go there. So I'm going to click OK, and we'll see here kind of the outline of Nebraska. And then before we jump into some of these properties that you can kind of see highlighted here in different colors, I just want to go over a little bit on how to use the public access atlas. So in the top left here, you'll see these 4 squares. That's your base map gallery. And what that allows you to do is kind of adjust how you look at the map. So right now it's kind of a tannish color. Really to start, I like to use the imagery hybrid, which is going to give a satellite imagery along with some city and road names, just so you have a general idea of what that landscape looks like. So I'm going to switch that over right away. And then to the left of that, if you already have a property in mind that you want to search, whether that's state land, federal lands, or conservation partner lands, you can go ahead and type that in, search, and the system will bring you right to that property. You can then look at the map sheet. So this is also available in a paper format. So I'm going to jump back real quick on that where to hunt. If you want a paper version of this public access atlas, you can request a printed copy of the public access atlas here. You just have to click that link, fill out some information, and one will get shipped out to you. So that's just another option if you prefer the paper versions. It's nice to have one in your vehicle when you're going out, just so you have those properties on a printed version if you don't have cell service or something like that. But let's jump back here to the public access atlas. So, some of the functions up there. If you hit home here, it's just going to bring you back to Nebraska, to the state. And then here, if you click that, it'll just show you your current location, then use the plus and minus to pan out and pan in. On the right side here, we have some layers. So these are some of those properties, the different types of properties. So conservation partner lands, federal lands, all those different properties. You can select, check them if you want to view them on the map, or unselect them if you don't want to view them. And then next to that is the legend. So as we zoom in here, you'll start to see different coloration, which represents those different land types. So from just as you zoom in, you can see the different colors and what they represent. But I'm going to go back to my layers here. And for the purpose of this conversation, we're going to be looking for spring turkey sites. So I'm not going to need fishing sites or public fishing lakes or public fishing streams. I'm going to leave it at conservation partner lands, federal lands, state lands. Stubble sites I'll leave in there, and then the open fields and water program land. So for this video, I'm going to focus kind of on the southeast part of the state. You can do this at anywhere in Nebraska, looking at different properties and wherever you might want to hunt. And really the first question you have to ask yourself is, from where you live, how far are you willing to travel? So I live in South Lincoln, and I like to hunt the southeast part of the state and know some of the properties down here already. So I'm going to focus on that area. But really, find your location. You can use that location finder there. Click that and kind of just look in the area and decide how far you're willing to travel and start looking at some of those properties. But I like to start with the public access atlas first before I move on to some of the other mapping features we're going to talk about, because I know the information is accurate. I know it's up to date, and it's a great place to start identifying some properties that you might want to explore further, scout further, to potentially spring turkey on. So let's see here. I'm going to go back to my legend here. So these green properties are all Nebraska Game and Park wildlife management areas. And if you zoom in on some of them, or one of them, I'll click here. If you click on the actual property, it'll tell you the property name, how many acres there are, what type of property it is, the species that are found there. This is a good start too, because it'll tell you different species that are known on that property. So if you find one and it doesn't say turkey, you probably want to avoid that from scouting further. It's not to say there aren't turkeys there, but the biologists and staff here do a pretty good job at identifying that, which species are likely to be on that property. And then for wildlife management areas and some of the other property types, you're going to see regulations and information here. This is just a little bit more information on some specific rules to that property. So here, no target shooting in west parking lot, in all parking lots in North Osage. So that's always good to know. So let's look at this property a little bit closer here in terms of what we're looking for in turkey habitat. And you can just keep panning in on it until you get it at a point where it looks good to you. So now that I'm on it, it's kind of hard to see some of the imagery just because of the screen overlayers here. So what I can do is I can go back to my layers. I know this is a state land. It's a wildlife management area, so I can uncheck that box, and that allows me to see that a little closer. So one thing I see right off the bat is there's a lot of canopy cover. And when it comes to turkeys tend to roost in thicker cover with big trees with horizontal limbs and a lot of canopy cover. So this is already looking pretty good to me. Mature oaks, pines, cottonwood trees. And the other thing I see right away is some ag here and a lot of open areas. So when turkeys come down from the roost during the spring, when they're in their breeding season, they want areas that are open. They can fly down from the roost and have an open area to go to. So this is looking pretty good. And really what I'm looking for is some areas that maybe aren't as big open areas like this here, but this smaller open area looks good to me simply because it's a small area surrounded by some nice overhead cover. And then we have all this ag with some potential leftover byproduct of ag practices for foraging. So this site is looking pretty good to me. So what I do then is I'm going to add that layer back. It's Osage Wildlife Management Area. So I know the name of that wildlife management area now. I'm just going to write that down, and then I'm going to come back in the Onyx Hunt app and locate that a little later here to take a closer look and show you some of the features that you can do to identify it as you get into the field and start scouting a little more. But let's look at a different site. So that's a wildlife management area. It had a lot of good hardwood cover. I'm just going to look at this other wildlife management, part of the same one, but it looks like the habitat's a little bit different. It's not as covered with canopy and trees. So I'm going to turn off my layer again just so I can see it a little bit better. So here, it looks like there's some water here, which is good, water here, which is good, but there's not as much of that canopy cover. There's a lot of open area and not really any smaller open areas that are more that I would really like to be looking for when I'm scouting for turkeys. So I'm going to move on from this one, but just to show you kind of a site, there could very potentially well be turkeys here, but for my sake, I'm not going to take a look at that, I don't think, when I get out there, just because I'm really looking for those roost trees where those turkeys are roosting and coming down, and going to be looking for those hens. But let's look at a different type of property real quick. Let's look at an open fields and water property. So I'm going to pull my legend back up. So we have OFW stands for open fields and water. So that like that lighter tan color. Why don't we look at this one? And one thing you can do while you're panned out like this, if you click on a property, we see obviously again, you see how many acres it is. This OFW property is open to all hunting seasons and trapping. And then if you click here zoom to, it'll bring you right to that property, which is nice. So you don't have to do that. So this property, I'm going to go ahead and turn off my layer again, so just so I can see it a little bit better. So again, there's trees there. It looks like a creek might run through here. Yep, it looks like right there's a creek running through there. It's wide open. I'm going to move on to another OFW site that might have a little bit more cover with some smaller openings that I might think those turkeys would be coming down from their roost and going towards. Let's take a look at this OFW property. All right, so this OFW property is open again to all hunting seasons. It's 241 acres, which is plenty big. And I'm going to turn off that map layer again just so I can see it a little bit better. And here right away, there's a lot of open ag here, but I'm seeing some good canopy cover here. And I'm really liking kind of this opening here, and also how this is, it's open, but it's smaller compared to some of the other ones we looked at. So this is probably a property, and there's also a creek running right through there, which is why I like to use that base layer that shows imagery hybrid. So it'll show you the road names and some of those creek and waterway names. So it's easier to identify those as well. So this is probably an OFW property that I would want to check out a little bit further, just because there is some good canopy cover. There's some nice smaller open areas, and there's also a water source there. So and then ag, obviously, so you have food, water, shelter all in one spot, and also some good strutting areas, it looks like, too. So after you've done that, and typically, if you're just scouting, you're going to go out and check out properties, you might want to locate 5 to 10 properties that you want to check out in person. So write them down. This is an OFW property. It has a site number here, so I'd write that down before I jump over to my Onyx maps, where I'm going to look at that a little further. But for the sake of time, I'm not going to find 5 today. I think I found 2 that I like, and we're going to jump over now to Onyx Hunt. So you're going to go to onyxmaps.com. And Onyx is available in a desktop mode and also on your mobile phone. So I typically, when I'm at home, like to use the computer because it's a little bigger screen, but you can do everything you really want to right on your phone as well. So that's why I encourage you to download that Onyx map. There are a standard free version of Onyx. And then there's also a premium membership that allows you to see some additional features in one state, then an elite membership that allows you to see all 50 states with those same features. But the basic package or free package, you still have GPS tracking. You get base map with some map layers, customizable waypoints. And again, it's still synced, like I said, between the web app and the phone app. So if you don't already have an account, you're going to have to click login and then hit Hunt Map and create an account if you didn't do one in the app. If you do have an account, you'll just go out to Hunt Map. That's what we're looking at today, since we're looking at for spring turkey hunting. So I'm going to click that. And then I'll need to log in. If you don't have an account, you can create an account by hitting Get Started there. And Onyx is similar to the public access atlas. The one caveat being that they're a little bit slower in updating their properties than the Nebraska Game Parks is going to be. But the one really neat feature about Onyx is you're able to see private land property borders if you do have the paid version, which is very helpful when you're in the field to avoid trespassing on accident. One of the reasons I really like to utilize it, especially once I'm getting into the field. So before we get started here, I'm just going to show you a little bit on how to use Onyx. So again, we have map layers here on the left. I'm going to focus on public lands, so I'm not going to select private lands. I'm going to do government land, so I'll turn that on. I'm going to do conservation partner lands, and I'm going to do open fields and waters as well. So those are those private lands that are open to public access. So, and you can go in and add more layers if you want to. They have a ton of layers, especially if you have the updated or the paid version. But for what we're doing today, this will be good. And then before, as I mentioned, I located the properties I wanted to check out. So what I like to do, instead of trying to go zoom in and find it on the map here, I'm going to type it in on the top here. So the name of that first one was Osage Wildlife Management Area, and comes up right here. And that'll zoom you right in on that same property, probably a little further than you like, but just an easy way to come to a property. And it tells you a lot of information here. You can look at weather, the forecast coming up, winds, all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of neat to see some real-time information about that property before you even get out there. But the reason I like to use Onyx is of the mobile capabilities. So I can do everything I want to on the computer right now. And then if I download the Onyx Hunt app and log into my same account, all that information, everything I'm about to show you will be on my phone. And it just makes it a lot easier to locate areas that I've identified I want to look out, parking lots, things like that, that I can do from the comfort of my home and then save time later when going out into the field versus trying to have to pull up the map again and refine those places. So the first thing I want to do here is you can see down here, also you can see satellite, a hybrid map, and topo map. For what we're doing, I'm just going to use a satellite map here, and you can also do a 3D map that kind of shows you some of the lay of the land a little bit more. But the first tool we have up here is a draw line measure distance tool. So just looking at this property, I see there's a parking lot on the bottom right side of the property and then another parking lot here. So and this was one of the areas I identified I wanted to check out just because it's a nice open area by all that thick canopy cover. So one thing you can do is you can see how far away that is from the parking lot already to know how far you're going to have to walk to get to that property, which is kind of cool. So 755 yards from this parking lot there kind of helps you identify later, which parking lot you might want to go to. Let's look at this parking lot to that same spot. So it might be a little bit closer to park in this lot. So it's kind of a cool feature right off the bat that you can do. The other thing is you can measure an area or draw a shape. So if I wanted to measure this whole area, I could just draw a line around the property and kind of get a good measurement of acres. We already know how many acres it is, but just kind of a cool tool for if you don't know how big the property is, you can do it right there. And then the other thing I like to do, back to that first tool, is to draw a line, is so I can easily identify when I go to the app later to come check this property out. I can easily identify that property by outlining it in red or whatever color you'd like. And then when I come back later to the app, I see that piece bright red on my phone in the app, so I can just quickly find it. You can pick your style, pick your weight, add it to a folder. So if I wanted to add this to Spring Turkey folder, it's a property I want to check out, I just click that and that line's added to my folder, and you just hit save. And then another function here that I want to show you is your waypoint. So these are really neat, especially once you get to the field. You can add different waypoints. So what I like to do right off the bat as well is use the parking waypoint to mark the parking lot, so I know right away how to find those parking lots. You can name it, the southeast parking lot. Name it whatever you want, save it. And then I would probably go ahead and do that for this one as well. But the other thing you can do with waypoints, and there's a lot of different waypoints you can use by hitting this more button here, is when you see all the different waypoints here, you can mark your blinds that you set up. You can, if you see a turkey or a feeding area in the field, you can select a waypoint that represents that. So here's a turkey waypoint. Here's a Jake turkey, a 10 turkey. So like if I get out there and I actually see a turkey, I can mark that. So when I come back later, I know where I saw that. A potential strutting zone where you might think turkeys are strutting. But for the basis of scouting from home, I like to use the point of interest. You can really use whatever you want, but this is the area I want to check out this area, that smaller field. And I also want to check out kind of up in this area as well, just because it's an open area, but it's a little bit smaller than some of the other big agricultural areas there. An area where I think turkeys would come out of those thicker canopies to move through and to strut. So again, I'm going to do a point of interest and save that. And really, doing this on 5 to 10 properties, marking the parking areas, marking your points of interest, and then just getting out in the morning, going to those parking lots, listening for gobbles, hitting a crow call or a gobbler call to try to elicit a response and try to identify where those birds might be roosting. So I'd go out in the morning, at dawn, a little bit before dawn, and start out at one area that I've identified. So this would be one of them, and go to a parking lot or two and see if I hear any gobbles. And from that point, if I hear a gobble, I can go in right on my phone in Onyx and I can mark where I heard that. And I think there is let's see, there a roost tree. So if you're in a parking lot, you hear a gobble, maybe in these woods here with potential roost sites, you can mark that in your phone and then come back later to that area. And typically in the mornings, I'm just listening for gobbles after I identified where I'm going to listen for gobbles. I'm typically not walking too far in. I don't want to spook any turkeys, just trying to identify where they are. So if I go to a parking lot, don't hear anything, I might go to the other parking lot and listen for a while and try to elicit a response eventually with a crow call or a shot gobble call. But if I don't hear anything, you could in the morning walk in, but you also have the risk of spooking a turkey. So at that point, you might just want to move on to the next area that you've identified then and do the same thing. Listen for those turkeys gobbling in the roost and identifying those on your map. And then if you do want to come back later in the day, kind of more midday instead of the morning or evening, to get a little closer and try to identify where some of those roost trees are, you can. At that point, then you could look for turkey feathers, turkey scat, other turkey tracks, and other turkey sign to try to guide where you might set up if you're going to be sitting in a blind or if you're going to be reaping or however you're going to hunt. Going back and looking for visual cues can be helpful, but just note that you don't want to invade, you don't want to scare turkeys away from where they're going to be. So just be cautious with that. But yeah, that's how I use Onyx. Identify the properties I want to go look at. And then after that, I make some marks on parking, my points of interest where I might think there are turkeys. I go to those sites. If I hear gobbles, I mark that down where I hear them, where those potential roost trees might be. And then I move on to the next property. And this is all preseason, few weeks before the season starts. Turkey behavior can change and does change as the breeding season heats up. So obviously the closer to the season you can scout without being too invasive in some of their habitat and where they might be roosting, the better, because those habits won't have changed as much by then. But at the same time, hitting as many properties as you can with try to identify gobbles or other turkey sign midday. It's going to help you hugely when the season opens up and you identify where you're going to sit on those days. And there's no better sign of turkeys than seeing them, hearing them, or seeing some of their sign. So this is what I like to do to try to reduce the amount of time I'm out having to scout. This just makes it a whole lot easier than just driving from property to property, walking and looking for sign. You have a lay of the land. There's habitat there before you even go there. So, some of those properties we looked at before on the public access atlas, I didn't even want to go check those out. So that's what I like to use the online mapping for. And then when you get to the field, then you're really listening, you're really looking for that sign. And you can use Onyx if you'd like to mark some of that sign as well. So if you pull up your waypoints again, there's waypoints for about everything you ever need. If you're looking for sheds while you're out scouting, you can mark where you found sheds. Like I said, turkey strut zone, tracks, anything you want, you can name it, whatever you want. So really powerful tool for scouting before you even get started. Then just a couple other features of Onyx that is kind of cool. So if you're in an area where there is no cell service, you can save the map you created to view offline. So if you had offline maps, I can create a new offline map here, and in this whole area then would be included in that offline map. So I didn't have to have cell service to see where I marked my waypoints, where the properties are marked. And you can make this resolution as small from 5 miles to 150 miles, save that, and then access that offline without cellular data on your cell phone, which is a great tool. And the other thing is, when you do get out in the field to check out some of those properties, the mobile app has a tracking feature. So if you park your vehicle and open your Onyx map and hit tracking, it'll track the route you took from when you went in, and the whole time it'll track your route so you can see where you went. Just kind of nice when you look back at it, and where you're deciding to go in the future if you weren't successful, or if you were, where you were exactly, because you were tracking yourself that whole time. So just another neat tool that Onyx offers. And there are other mapping applications, obviously, like Google Earth is one. Hunt Stand's another one specifically for hunting. So there are other options out there. Onyx is the one I prefer to use, but feel free to check those out as well. All right. Well, that is about all I have for you all today. Just a note, as I said before, we're going to have more of these Hunt Nebraska spring turkey videos coming up every Wednesday. So the 23rd, the 30th, the 6th, and the 13th at 7 p.m., except for April 6th will be the Facebook Live Q&A at 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock p.m., where you can ask staff and conservation officer any questions you have about turkey hunting, rules and regulations to, scouting, to anything you can think of. But if you'd like to learn a little bit more about turkey hunting, feel free to give Hunt Nebraska a like and follow. And you'll be able to catch those videos either at 7 p.m. on the Hunt Nebraska page or after the fact on the Hunt Nebraska page. And feel free to ask any questions in the comments that come up, and we'll get back to you whether you ask them live or after the fact. So thank you all for joining today. If you have any last questions, put them in the comments and I'll get those answered as I can. So thank you all.